There is a deeply beloved institution here at the Globe that has nothing to do with delivering the news, and everything to do with delivering joy. Globe Santa is a program at the Boston Globe Foundation that delivers presents to children in need, and 100% of the donations to Globe Santa go to the purchase of toys for those children. Thousands of people write real letters to Globe Santa, and then a present arrives at their door, bringing joy for the holidays. Globe Santa has been around for decades, and this year, for its 70th anniversary, the Globe podcast will help spread some of that cheer by walking you through the history of Globe Santa, from its earliest origins in the late 1800s to its modern equivalent. But one thing stays the same: the holiday spirit. Joining me today is Linda Matchan, former Globe reporter and editor, and currently the Globe Santa editor.
I've come to see Globe Santa as an actual person. I think he's very optimistic and upbeat. He sort of represents the best in humanity to me.
And Lisa Tuite, former head of the Globe Library for 38 years.
To me, it seemed like the safety of it. And it's an odd word to use, but I feel like people felt like they knew Globe Santa. The Globe Santa was this benevolent person that would help them.
And despite the name, Globe Santa's mission is to deliver joy to all children in need, whether they celebrate Christmas or not.
And I'm speaking as a Jewish person. Historically, I'm the first Jewish Globe Santa editor. But Globe Santa is ecumenical, gives to everybody. Even though he's Santa, we say he's there at holiday time.
The letters are 100% anonymous. Globe Santa never shares who writes in, but their letters and stories have appeared in the Globe over the long history of this iconic institution. And a look back at the archives of Globe Santa show just how lasting the power of giving and spreading joy really is. Today, I'm so grateful to share with you the joy of the holidays with this walk down a candy-caned memory lane. Thank you both for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start with, how would you describe Globe Santa to someone who has never heard of it before? How does this work?
Starting in the fall, people who know that they're going to need assistance with toys and books for their children begin to write letters to Globe Santa saying what their need is. Now, these are all people who have been vetted through the Department of Transitional Assistance or one of the agencies that they work with. So they establish, yes, these people are truly in need. And then the letters start pouring in. And last year, for example, we had something close to 17,000 letters that arrived. And we have a team of people who read them.
Some of the time, the letters have bare minimum information, just ages and genders of the children in need. But sometimes they'll get stories too. And that might be because, well, it's a letter to Santa.
It's printed on the letter, Dear Globe Santa. And oftentimes it's just, have we ever had a terrible year? And then they'll just itemize the awful things that have happened and the things that they've done to try to pull themselves out of this problem. But it seems in many cases there's a lot of obstacles that they're facing, and they're embarrassed to be asking for gifts. But they, even more strongly, they feel they do not want to disappoint their children, because there's nothing sadder than going back to school after the holidays and somebody asking, what did you get? And imagine how you feel if you didn't get anything. I mean, you feel so little and so invisible.
Oh.
It's not always the parents either. Sometimes an older sibling. When I say older, I mean like maybe only like 12 or 13. We saw letters from siblings that are saying, I don't need anything. I don't want anything, but I want my brother or sister to have a truck or a doll. I came across a lot of letters from, siblings and other people in the family, grandparents, people who are writing on behalf of very young children.
But Globe Santa isn't just active from November to December. Globe Santa works nearly all year long.
It starts back in February when we have a dedicated, this is his actual occupation, a toy selector who goes to the toy fairs. It used to be in New York, and now there's a New England one in Springfield. And it's 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 something. There's like all these people like walking around in stilts and clowns, and the toy selector goes around and they have all the new toys that are out there and some really old toys too that even I remember from my childhood.
With hundreds of options to choose from and so many different kids to consider, Globe Santa has a way of making a list and checking it twice.
There's sort of a hierarchy of things that we look for, things that are fun but also educational, things that won't break, or, a kid can't swallow. Things that have batteries are not allowed because then if they run out, parents have to go out and buy the batteries.
The toy selector reviews the toys for maximum fun and enjoyment and minimal hazard or burden, and then draws up lists of purchase recommendations and amounts for Globe Santa to consider.
And then lists are given to a whole group of people here who make the final selection, and then the purchasing starts very early.
But how does Globe Santa know which kids would like which toys? The matchmaking here can be quite a task. With 17,000 or more letters coming in, there's a lot of kids out there to match with toys and books and games.
So it's ranked by age and gender, as are the books, which tend to be books that are award-winning books, Caldecott Medal books, and they get a combination of both, and they get a family game that they could all play together.
Oh, that's sweet. So, let's talk about the origins. How did Globe Santa even come to be?
It's actually a charity that's gone on since the late 1800s. It was initially the Boston Post, an esteemed newspaper, started what was called Post Santa back in the late 1800s. When the Post closed in 1956, there was, a concern as to this charity now had been going for 56 plus years, and how was that going to continue? The Globe purchased actually the archives, and I think it was Mayor Hines that might have stepped up.
Mayor John Hines served 3 terms as Boston's mayor from 1950 to 1960 and was pretty consequential as far as establishing iconic Boston institutions. He also helped create the Freedom Trail. So, for Mayor Hines, what was then known as the Post Santa needed to go on, even if the Post wouldn't.
And the mayor was out there kind of doing the work of letting the city know that this was a really important charity that they should fund. And it was called the Boston Globe Mayor Hines Santa Fund. There was a story in the paper in 1956 on November 18th in the Boston Sunday Globe, back when newspapers were 300 plus pages. It was announced as a great undertaking to see that no child in Greater Boston goes unremembered on Christmas will be announced in full detail the day after Thanksgiving, which they did.
The announcement detailed 2 goals for the Boston Globe Mayor Hines Santa Fund.
One was to locate the hundreds of children who might go without on the big day. And an obligation was to be thorough and earnest. They had to be thorough so that no child will be overlooked. And we must tell our story earnestly so that our people will be proud to respond.
Of course, because this announcement appeared in the newspaper, it ran alongside news stories of the day.
The stories about Globe Santa were adjacent to international stories about the U.S. was pushing for withdrawal from Egypt, troops were revolting in Hungary, a tavern exploded in Charlestown.
Back then, Globe writers would visit the homes of the families who wrote in, though everyone was still kept anonymous. Their stories and the conditions of their home lives lent a greater understanding of what hardships Bostonians were going through.
These were terrific writers who would establish these sort of Dickensian-like stories.
Charlie's father is an alcoholic. In the past 10 years, he has been jailed 12 times, twice for terms of 2 months or more in the House of Corrections. The trouble stems from the fact that Charlie's father becomes aggressive when he drinks. Several of his sentences have been for assault and battery in addition to drunkenness. Charlie is often left on his own. A year or so ago, he was theoretically in the care of 2 older sisters, but both girls got into difficulties that brought even more grief to the beleaguered home. Charlie has been present for all of the conflicts attendant to his family's many troubles. He could scarcely miss them, for he lives in a tiny 4-room house that seems to defy the law of gravity by continuing to stand. The ancient building has a one-peak roof, no basement, and only 4 rooms. There's a soapstone sink supported by 2x4s in the kitchen. There are no faucets, for all water must be drawn from a well outside the back door. There is no plumbing in the house. The plumbing is warmed by 2 space heaters, both of which gasp acrid kerosene fumes continually. For as long as he can remember, Charlie has slept on a creaky sofa whose cushions have incubated countless generations of moths and silverfish. The right rear leg of the sofa is missing, and each night Charlie must check to see that a block of wood is jammed under it so that it won't teeter during the night. Many of Charlie's nights have been interrupted in spite of the block of wood under the sofa. He has heard the insistent knock of the neighborhood police officer who has come to pick up his father. Charlie has awakened to see his father unconscious on the floor, his mother begging that the officer let him have another chance.
I think in those days, reporters maybe had a little bit more literary license than they do now.
But even accounting the literary license, in some ways, life was still pretty hard back then.
There were a lot of illnesses that don't necessarily happen today. A lot of childhood illnesses, polio, leukemias, tuberculosis, mumps and measles, things that there are now vaccines for. And also the availability of health care. It was a major ordeal to get a child to, a hospital if they even had access to it. There weren't that many cars on the road. People didn't own cars. So, things like that would come up a lot of, and not just the children, also parents were ill. Parents appeared to die at a much younger age than they do now. There were people who had come back from the war with PTSD. There were a lot of elements of living in society that were hard for some people.
With the amount of letters and the Globe writers who wrote those stories, Globe Santa became an important recurring section of the Globe at year's end.
They would devote 2 or 3 pages to Globe Santa, and it would include, what the writers were saying and why the need was so great. It would include excerpts of letters from what kids had sent in. There were cartoons and drawings, and they were absolutely gorgeous.
As the years went on, the 50s gave way to the 60s and the Cold War. The pages of the newspaper reflected those times, but Globe Santa managed to float above the fray of global politics and news.
In the early 60s, you'd see articles about what to do if there's a nuclear blast, what to do, how to protect yourself. President Kennedy was assassinated during the beginning of the Christmas season, and I didn't see any reference to this tragedy the country was facing in any references to Globe Santa. Same with the assassination of Martin Luther King. Children were naive about what was happening. Things weren't addressed as clearly, as definitively. The idea was that children should not know about this sort of thing. And Globe Santa kind of dwelt in that universe.
As the 1960s counterculture took swing, the Globe started to reflect those changes in society too. But Globe Santa still dwelled in this apolitical universe.
There was an article, I think in the late 60s, that was advising parents on what to do if your child was a hippie, with no sense of irony or humor at all. It was a serious problem. In the 60s and 70s, you're starting to see the beginning, like a lot of drug use and abuse, and particularly when the Vietnam War, there was a lot of people coming back suffering from terrible problems, and it was reflected in how the children were living their lives. But it feels like Globe Santa kind of skirted those issues. They weren't mentioned in the stories. It was purely, we need to give kids toys. Nowadays, it's different. Nowadays, the letters are much more specific to the kind of global problems that people are facing, so that you'll see dozens and dozens of letters from families who have fled Ukraine, for example. People who talk very candidly about how they came from Iraq and their children still can't sleep at night because they have nightmares about the blasts and so on.
From the Vietnam War to the war in Ukraine, from early 20th century childhood diseases to PTSD. The world changed, but Globe Santa stayed the same.
To me, it seemed like the safety of it. And it's an odd word to use, but I feel like people felt like they knew Globe Santa. The Globe Santa was this benevolent person that would help them. I remember one letter from a boy, and he said, I don't know what he had done the year before, but it had totally not panned out for him. And he was sort of like, I'm coming to you now because, I tried to do it another way and it just didn't work. I didn't get anything, so I think benevolence and safety. I feel like it's safety, and it's anonymous too. The other thing, other charities, it's not necessarily that anonymous. It's sort of, if you have to go to a place with your family and get a toy and see Santa, that's great. That's wonderful. But this has an anonymity to it that I think creates a sort of safe space for people who are writing in.
It's kind of hard to put into words. But Lisa and I were talking about the sense of community that came around Globe Santa and how, in some ways, I fear that it doesn't necessarily exist in the same way anymore. People tend to live in their own silos. But, there would be these stories about everyone from the Archbishop, helping Globe Santa, to women who were in a jail in the Framingham Reformatory who every year would make a donation to Globe Santa. Art school students would contribute work to the Globe Santa campaign. This woman named Mrs. Beatrice, who knitted 60 pairs of mittens for Globe Santa, outdoing her previous record of only 55 the year before. It's just like everybody knew what Globe Santa was and wanted a part of it. Kids would have
boxes were given to Boston public school children. All Boston public school children had Globe Santa boxes in their classrooms. And not at all competitive. It was never, this school will outdo you, this grade 3 will beat grade 4. But the irony of that is that oftentimes the very children who were giving a penny or a nickel or whatever were recipients of Globe Santa, though they didn't know that. There was a big emphasis on the Boston Public School, the children giving, seeing as that's kind of what Post Santa was, that its inception was children doing it. So it went, the donors went down to the smallest people we have, so.
Yeah, it gets to the fact that a newspaper was read by everybody. And so the message was always amplified. And now messages are so splintered that it's very hard to get everybody on the same page and to have everybody know the same things. So that's why I think it's really cool that a newspaper is still doing it, even though it's digitized and we have to change the way in which we give our message, like through podcasts, for example. Nevertheless, Globe Santa prevails.
And to end this episode, I'll leave you with the first letter Globe Santa received this year.
Our Joey is the most selfless person in the world. He asks for nothing, but deserves so much. We as disabled grandparents can only barely survive. He loves our chicken soup or cutlets, and to him, those are gifts from God. But a 12-year-old deserves more. He is the future of this family. Please invest in him. God bless you.
This episode was written and produced by me. Special thanks to Linda Matchan, Lisa Tuite, Michael Bello, and Katie Narduzzo. Happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for listening.